Hi, I'm Michelle Alexander, and I just could not be more thrilled and honored and humbled by the award that you at the ACLU have bestowed upon me. It is particularly meaningful because of my deep, most profound respect for the ACLU as an organization, and also because the ACLU is for me a second family, a place that feels like home. So for my ACLU family to acknowledge my work and my efforts in this way really means more to me than I can possibly express. In many ways, the book that I wrote, The New Jim Crow, and all of the work that I've been doing in recent years really is traceable to those early years I spent at the ACLU. In fact, the title of the book comes from my very first day on the job at the ACLU. I woke up that morning nervous about heading to work as the director of the Racial Justice Project there, and left my apartment building in Oakland, California, and stepped out on the street rushing to catch the bus. And on a large telephone pole was a bright orange poster with large bold print, and on it it said, "The drug war is the new Jim Crow." And I paused for a minute and scanned the text of the flyer, and I saw that some radical community group was organizing a meeting a few blocks away at a church. They were organizing to protest the expansion of the prison system in California, the new 3 strikes law, racial profiling, the drug war, police brutality. The list went on, and I remember standing there staring at the flyer, thinking to myself, yeah, our criminal justice system is racist in a lot of ways, but it doesn't help to make such absurd comparisons to Jim Crow. People will just think you're crazy. Now, of course, when I joined the ACLU, I understood well that our criminal justice system, much like all institutions in our society, are infected to some degree or another with conscious and unconscious bias and stereotyping. But I assumed that our criminal justice system was just another institution in our society infected with racial bias. I had no idea of what I would learn in the months and years to come. It was only after years of representing victims of racial profiling and police brutality and investigating patterns of drug law enforcement in poor communities of color and attempting to assist people who had been released from prison as they faced one closed door after another, that I had a series of experiences that began what I now call my awakening. I began to awaken to the reality that our criminal justice system now functions much more like a system of racial and social control than a system of crime prevention and control. And I had a number of experiences while working at the ACLU that began to open my eyes, but one in particular I'll never forget. It involved a young African-American man who was about 19 years old, who walked into my office one day and forever changed not only how I viewed our criminal justice system, but also how I came to view myself as a civil rights lawyer and advocate. At the time, we had recently launched our DWB campaign, our Driving While Black or Brown campaign, which eventually became a national campaign of the ACLU and forced racial profiling to the front of the national consciousness. And this young man walked into my office carrying a stack of papers about this thick. He had taken detailed notes of his encounters with the Oakland Police Department over about a 9-month period of time. He had notes of every stop, every frisk, every search, descriptions of every time his car was pulled over or a car he was riding was pulled over, what was said, what was done. He had names of officers, even badge numbers in many situations. He had descriptions of every time he was stopped or frisked or made to lie spread eagle on the sidewalk. Descriptions of every search, whether his car was searched, whether he was searched. I'm starting to think, yeah, he's the one. You know, he was well-spoken, incredibly articulate. He was good-looking. I started to think, you know, juries are going to love him. He'll do well with the media. And then he said something that made me pause. And he looked down and got quiet as I became concerned. And I said to him, "Did you just say you're a felon? Did you just say you're a drug felon?" I had actually been screening people with prior criminal convictions. When people would call our hotline number to report discrimination by the police, we would send them a form to fill out, asking them a bunch of questions about their experience. And one of them was, have you ever been convicted of a felony? We believed, and I believed, that we couldn't possibly represent someone as a named plaintiff or among the lead plaintiffs in a class action suit alleging racial profiling by police if they had criminal record, because we knew that if we did, law enforcement and the media would be all over us saying, well, of course the police should be keeping their eye on him. He's a felon. He's a criminal. This isn't about race. This is about the police going after the criminals. And he's quiet for a long time, and then finally he looks up and looks me right in the eye and he says, yeah, I'm a felon, but let me tell you what happened to me. Let me tell you what happened. The police planted drugs on me and they set me up, and they framed me and my friend and they beat us up. And he starts telling me this whole story about how he was set up and framed by the police, and you know, cocaine had been planted on him, and he's telling me this whole long story, and I'm just shaking my head saying, I am sorry, but I cannot represent you if you have a felony record. And I tried to explain why that was the case and how I understood why it might seem unfair, but I could not represent him with his felony record. And he becomes agitated, starts telling me more information, more details, more facts, the people I could talk to, the witnesses who could corroborate his story, saying, I'm innocent, I'm telling you, I'm innocent. I just took the plea. I just took the plea because I was scared of doing the time. I just took the plea because I was scared. I was scared of doing the time. They told me that if I just took the plea, I could just walk right out of there with just felony probation. But if I try to fight this thing, I'd be looking at 10 years, 15 years, 20 years behind the bars. And I was scared of doing the time, so I just took the plea because I just wanted to walk out of there. But I'm telling you, I'm innocent. And I just said, I'm sorry, but I can't represent you if you have a criminal record. And then he became enraged. And he said, what's to become of me? What's to become of me? How am I supposed to take care of myself as a man? He says, do you know that I can't get a job anywhere because of my criminal record? Anywhere. So where am I supposed to sleep? What am I supposed to do? He says, do you know I can't even get into public housing? I can't even get into public housing because of my criminal record. He says, I have to sleep in my grandma's basement at night because nowhere else will take me in. He said, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to take care of myself as a man? He says, do you know I can't even get food stamps, food, because of my felony record? He says, good luck finding one young black man in my neighborhood they haven't gotten to yet. They've gotten to us all already. And with that, he snatches all of those handwritten notes up and just begins ripping them up into tiny little pieces. He throws them into the air as he walks out saying, I can't believe I trusted you. You're no better than the police. Well, some months after that, I'm in my office at the ACLU, open up the newspaper, and what's on the front page? Well, it turns out that the Oakland Writers police scandal has broken. A gang of police officers, otherwise known as a drug task force, has been charged with planting drugs on suspects, beating folks up, and who is among who is named as one of the main officers charged with beating folks up and planting drugs on people? Well, the officer he had identified to me as having planted drugs on him and beat up him and his friend. And I'm embarrassed to say that it was only then that the light bulb finally began to go on for me. And I had to realize and admit to myself that he was right about me. I was no better than the police. The minute he told me he was a felon, I just stopped listening. I couldn't even hear what he had to say. And that was the beginning of my journey of asking myself and others a lot of hard questions, of listening more carefully to the stories of those cycling in and out of prison, doing an enormous amount of research. And what I learned in that process was that my great crime wasn't in refusing to represent an innocent man. My great crime was in imagining that there was some path to racial or social justice that does not include those we view as guilty. And I learned some facts that blew my mind. I learned that there are more African American men today denied the right to vote than in 1870, the year the 15th Amendment was ratified, which prohibits laws that explicitly deny the right to vote on the basis of race. Now, of course, during the Jim Crow era, poll taxes and literacy tests operated to keep black folks from the polls. Well, today, felon disenfranchisement laws accomplish in many states what poll taxes and literacy tests ultimately could not. And in many large urban areas today, more than half of working age African American men now have criminal records and are thus subject to legalized discrimination in virtually every area of social, economic, and political life. That's why I now believe that the folks who posted that sign on the telephone pole got it right, and that we have not in this country truly ended racial caste in America. We've merely redesigned it. And I would never have had this awakening if it had not been for the work that I had the privilege of doing at the ACLU and the extraordinary people I had the opportunity to work with. People like Alan Schlosser, and John Crew, and Jay Shrikantaya, and Dorothy Ehrlich, and many, many, many others. You know, for the last few years now, I have been traveling around the country, speaking to just about anyone who will listen about the crisis of mass incarceration in this country and the magnitude of the harm that has been done in poor communities of color. I've been trying to dispel the myths that have helped to sustain the system, including the myth that the explosion in incarceration can be understood simply in terms of crime and crime rates. I've been trying to help people to understand that this drug war has not been driven primarily by concerns about drug addiction or drug abuse, but it's been driven instead by politics, particularly racial politics. Deliberate as well as unconscious efforts by politicians to exploit our nation's racial divisions, fears, and anxieties for political gain. And I have been trying to help people of all colors who have been asleep and in denial to have the same kind of awakening that I finally did. And I have to say that now, 5 years after the new Jim Crow was first published, I am more hopeful than I have ever been before. I see people of all backgrounds waking up, becoming active, getting engaged. I see faith communities beginning to organize, young people becoming bolder and more determined in their activism and advocacy. And most encouragingly, I see formerly incarcerated people and people most directly impacted by the system of incarceration finding their voice and beginning to organize for the restoration of basic civil and human rights. So while I am filled with hope, I have to say in closing though that there's also reason for concern. If we downsize our prison system primarily just to save money or to make it more efficient. We will maybe have saved some lives in the short run, but countless lives will be lost in the long run as our nation finds new ways of controlling, exploiting, and marginalizing people of color in the future. Real progress on the racial justice front will only occur when the millions who are cycling in and out of our prisons and jails today are home with their families, having real jobs that pay a living wage, and are contributing to the future of their communities and to our nation as a whole. And until we awaken the dignity and value of all people, of all colors, no matter who you are, where you came from, or what you have done, our nation will continue to find new ways to exploit and control the most vulnerable. And I believe we at the ACLU must remain steadfast in our commitment to telling the stories of those who've been labeled criminals, and for standing with and speaking up those who are most at risk of having their rights violated and their human rights denied. Thank you again so much for this recognition and honor of my work and your work and the work that we will continue to do together. I am hopeful for our future, and I believe we can and will muster the courage to do what must be done. Thank you so much.